Picture this. It's March 15th, 1977. Star Wars is about to change cinema forever. Apple Computer is just getting started in a garage. And at the St. Louis assembly plant, Chevrolet General Manager Robert Lund is about to drive something special off the production line. The 500,000th Corvette, a white coupe that represented more than just a number. It represented survival, because the 77 Corvette shouldn't even exist. Today, we're diving into 20 crazy facts about the 1977 Corvette that'll completely change how you see this underrated icon. Trust me, by the time we hit number 1, you'll understand why this unassuming year model holds secrets that even most Corvette experts have never discovered. Number 20. The color-changing engine controversy. Here's something 99% of Corvette owners don't know. If you own a 1977 Corvette, your engine could be one of two completely different colors, and it has nothing to do with restoration. Between August 23rd and September 7th, 1976, something unprecedented happened at the Flint engine assembly plant. GM was in the middle of a corporate crisis. See, they'd started putting Chevrolet orange engines in Oldsmobiles, Buicks, and Pontiacs to standardize production. Sounds efficient, right? Except one Oldsmobile customer opened his hood, saw that distinctive Chevy orange, and sued GM. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the executive offices. GM's solution was radical. Change every engine color to corporate blue, neutral, anonymous, safe from lawsuits. But here's where it gets interesting. The changeover happened right in the middle of 1977 Corvette production. Early 77 Corvettes, roughly the first 2,000 to 3,000 cars, left the factory with traditional Chevy orange engines. Then, seemingly overnight, every engine turned blue. Today, 77 Corvettes are significantly rarer than blue ones, but most owners have no idea which version they have. And here's the kicker. Original orange painted 77 engines are worth thousands more to collectors because they represent the last gasp of traditional Chevy orange before corporate bureaucracy took over. Number 19. The glass top that never existed. Every 77 Corvette sales brochure, an early option sheet listed RPO CC1, glass roof panels for $200. Dealers took orders. Customers wrote checks. There was just one problem. Not a single 77 Corvette left the factory with factory glass T-tops. Zero. The reason? A dispute so secretive that Chevrolet refused to discuss it for decades. GM had contracted with an aftermarket supplier to provide glass T-top panels. The supplier, seeing an opportunity, started selling identical panels directly to Corvette owners at lower prices, while simultaneously fulfilling the GM contract. When Chevrolet discovered this double dealing, they killed the entire program overnight. But here's where it gets really interesting. The supplier, refusing to back down, rebranded their panels as moonroofs and sold them directly to the aftermarket. Thousands of Corvette owners bought these and installed them, never knowing they were installing the parts that caused a corporate divorce. Chevrolet finally introduced their own glass tops in 1978 for $349, nearly double the original 77 price. That price increase? Pure spite. Number 18. The Stingray name that disappeared. Walk up to a 77 Corvette and look at the front fenders. Notice anything missing? The Stingray script that had been there since 1969 is gone. Just gone. Replaced with traditional crossed flags emblems. But why would Chevrolet remove one of the most iconic nameplates in automotive history? The answer involves corporate politics. Trademark dispute. In 1976, a small boat manufacturer filed a trademark challenge against General Motors, claiming prior use of the Stingray name for their boats. Then the legal department discovered something terrifying. The boat company had been using Stingray since 1961, 2 years before Chevrolet. GM's original Stingray trademark filing had clerical errors. Rather than risk a lengthy court battle, GM made a strategic decision. Drop Stingray for 1977. Use that year to negotiate a settlement. Bill Mitchell, the designer who created the Stingray name, went ballistic. He fought the decision all the way to the GM board. He lost. For 1 year, GM officially pretended the Stingray never existed. Number 17. The milestone car that should have been black. The 500,000th Corvette. March 15th, 1977. White with red interior. Ceremonial. Beautiful. Completely wrong. Internal GM documents reveal that the Milestone car was supposed to be black. Specifically, the newly returned black paint option that hadn't been offered since 1969. Marketing had planned an entire campaign around the return of black. The 500,000th Corvette would debut the color. Then, 3 weeks before the milestone, everything changed. Robert Lund, Chevrolet's general manager, hated black cars. Thought they looked like hearses. When he found out he'd be driving a black Corvette for all the publicity photos, he personally intervened. The order went out, paint the milestone car white. But here's the really crazy part. The original black 500,000th Corvette was already built, already painted. GM couldn't just scrap it, so they did something brilliant. They built a second 500,000th Corvette, the white one for publicity, and quietly sold the black one to a dealer in Chicago. Both cars had sequential VINs. Today, the white car sits in the National Corvette Museum. But that black car, it's privately owned. The owner knows the full story and owns the 500,000th Corvette that wasn't supposed to exist. Number 16. The California engine nobody talks about. In 1977, if you lived in California and wanted a Corvette, you had exactly one engine option. The L48 350 with an automatic transmission. That's it. California emissions regulations were so strict that Chevrolet couldn't certify any other combination. But here's what nobody tells you. That California L48 was not the same engine as the rest of the country got. California engines had a completely different emissions package. The California engines were so detuned that they barely made 170 horsepower, 10 less than the federal spec engines. Chevrolet never advertised this because admitting their California cars were slower would have killed sales. But some California dealers made a cottage industry out of off-books, modifications. They'd swap in federal spec carburetors and basically undo the California emissions package. These dealers charged $2,000 for what they called the California Performance Package. It was completely illegal. The EPA investigated. In 1979, 3 dealers lost their franchises. But during 77 and 78, they modified hundreds of Corvettes. Number 15. The aluminum wheel mystery. 1977 was supposed to be the big year for aluminum wheels on Corvettes. The optional cast aluminum wheels finally arrived. RPO N90, $299. Nearly 15% of buyers checked that option box. Except the official production records show 12,646 cars with aluminum wheels. That's 25%. Somebody's lying. Here's what happened. Kelsey Hayes, the supplier in Mexico who made the wheels, over-delivered. They produced way more wheels than GM ordered. GM, not wanting to waste money, installed the wheels on any car where the buyer checked any wheel-related option. The dealers didn't complain. Customers were thrilled. But it meant that thousands of Corvettes got an expensive option for free. Today, if you find a 77 Corvette with original aluminum wheels, but no N90 designation on the build sheet, you've got one of these accounting error cars. Number 14. The smart switch that was too smart. 1977 introduced the smart switch, a steering column stock that combined headlight dimmer, windshield wipers, and turn signals into one unit. Sounds convenient, right? Here's what Chevrolet didn't advertise. The smart switch failed constantly. The early production units had a design flaw. The internal contacts were made from brass that corroded when exposed to humidity. Within 2 years, over 30% of 77 Corvettes had experienced smart switch failures. Chevrolet issued a silent recall. Not a public recall, a silent one. They sent bulletins to dealers. Switches were replaced under warranty. No paperwork. No NHTSA filing. The replacement smart switches used a completely different internal design and have lasted decades. The problem is telling which switch you have. Some dealers rebuilt the original switches with aftermarket contact sets and sold them as used parts. These Frankenstein switches look original, but they're ticking time bombs. Number 13. The cruise control that needed a computer science degree. For the first time in Corvette history, cruise control became available in 77. RPO K30, $105. Only available with automatic transmissions. The 1977 cruise control system was one of the most complex pieces of electronics GM had ever installed in a car. It used vacuum servos, electronic speed sensors, and a primitive computer that weighed 3 pounds. Here's the problem. The system couldn't handle hills. Drive up and down, incline, and the cruise would slowly lose speed until you were crawling. Drive down a hill, and you'd get a lurching, surging mess. Chevrolet received so many complaints that they issued a technical service bulletin. But the fix introduced a new problem. The heavier springs meant the cruise control had to work harder, which wore out vacuum servos faster. Average lifespan, about 30,000 miles. Here's where it gets interesting. A group of engineers in Detroit, moonlighting on weekends, created an aftermarket cruise control module that actually worked. About 500 of these kits were sold, mostly through word of mouth at Corvette clubs. GM threatened legal action. The engineers backed down. But those 500 cars still have systems so reliable that owners refuse to convert back to stock. Number 12. The fuel injection that almost returned. In 1977, Chevrolet engineers had a fully functional fuel injection system ready for the Corvette. Real, electronic fuel injection. The prototype system used Bosch components. The test mule Corvettes were running it successfully by late 1976. Power was up, fuel economy improved, emissions were cleaner. So why didn't it happen? Money and corporate pride. The system would have cost $800 per car. That would push the base price over $9,000. But the real reason it died, GM was developing their own system. They didn't want Corvette jumping ahead with Bosch components. The prototype systems were dismantled, but 3 of the fuel injection test mule Corvettes survived. They were supposed to be crushed. Instead, they were hidden in a storage facility in Warren, Michigan. One of those test mule Corvettes was sold at auction in 2008. The buyer found the complete, functional fuel injection system. He contacted GM. They offered him 6 figures for the car to make it disappear. He refused. Number 11. The sport wagon that shouldn't exist. Most people have never heard of the 1977 Corvette Sport Wagon. It wasn't a factory option. It was an aftermarket conversion kit created by Greenwood Corvettes. The conversion extended the roof rearward, added glass quarter panels, and installed a vertical rear window with a hatch. The result? A Corvette shooting brake, part sports car, part wagon. For $6,000, you could convert your 77 Corvette. Best estimates suggest only 20 to 25 were built. They're better than the original Corvette in almost every practical way. More cargo space, better rear visibility, improved weight distribution. But they're hideous. Brilliantly, wonderfully, magnificently hideous. Yet values are climbing. These sport wagons will be 6-figure cars because they're documented Greenwood conversions with provenance. Number 10. The radio delete option that wasn't really a delete. 1,248 77 Corvettes were ordered, without radios. But Chevrolet still installed the radio mounting bracket, all the wiring, and the speakers. They just didn't install the actual radio unit. Total weight savings? 3 pounds. People ordered this option because Chevrolet's Delco radios were terrible. So audio enthusiasts ordered cars without radios, then immediately installed high-end aftermarket systems. Pioneer, Kenwood, Craig. These companies were building car audio systems that put factory radios to shame. But the Delco wiring harness wasn't compatible with most aftermarket radios. So installers would just cut the factory harness and splice in new wiring. Today, some cars have completely butchered wiring. Others have professional installations that are now considered period-correct modifications. The irony is that original Delco radios have become so collectible that radio delete cars are actually worth less than cars with factory radios. Number 9. The theft alarm that alerted thieves. For 77, Chevrolet moved the alarm activator from the driver's side fender to the driver's side door lock. This change accidentally created the most easily defeated alarm system in automotive history. Here's how the old system worked. Hidden switch on the fender. Thief doesn't know where it is. Here's how the new system worked. Obvious switch in the door lock. Thief sees it immediately. Thief picks the lock using the alarm switch as a guide. Alarm never activates. Professional car thieves figured this out within months. 1977 Corvettes became the most stolen sports car in America by 1978. Insurance companies started refusing to write policies for them entirely. And the alarm switch placement was identified as the primary problem. The change wasn't about security. It was about convenience for owners. GM wanted the alarm switch easier to access so owners would actually use it. The old fender switch was annoying to reach, so GM moved it to the door lock. Sometimes good intentions create terrible outcomes. Number 8. The yellow paint that wasn't yellow. Chevrolet offered 4 different yellow shades in 1977. Corvette, bright yellow. Corvette, medium yellow. Corvette, light yellow. And Corvette, yellow gold. All 4 colors were actually the same base paint. The difference was how many clear coats were applied. This was Chevrolet's clever way to offer color variety without actually manufacturing different paint formulas. One base yellow. Multiple finishes. Cost savings were enormous. But there was a problem. The clear coat system wasn't perfected yet. UV exposure caused the clear to break down. As it degraded, the underlying yellow oxidized. And all 4 yellow variants oxidized differently. Bright yellow with 4 clear coats turned greenish. Medium yellow with 3 clear coats turned orange. Light yellow with 2 clear coats stayed relatively stable. Yellow gold turned into a weird brownish gold that nobody liked. Today, most 77 yellow Corvettes are not their original color anymore. They're whatever color UV exposure turned them into. Restoration shops discovered this problem when they tried to match original paint colors. They'd check the paint code, mix the correct color, and the new paint wouldn't match the old paint at all, because the old paint had chemically changed over 45 years. The solution? Strip everything to bare fiberglass and start over. But some owners like their oxidized paint. One owner has a 77 bright yellow Corvette that turned jade green. It's factory original paint, never restored. The oxidation happened naturally over decades. He considers it a patina. Concours judges consider it damage. He doesn't care. His car is the color time made it. Number 7. The manual transmission that nobody wanted. 77 offered a 4-speed manual as the base transmission. 0 extra cost. You'd think in a sports car, most buyers would choose manual, right? Only 4.2% did. 2,060 cars got the 4-speed manual. Everyone else chose the 3-speed turbo hydromatic automatic. The reason? The manual was terrible. The shift linkage was sloppy. The clutch was heavy. The gear ratios were so wide that acceleration felt sluggish. And the biggest problem? You couldn't get air conditioning with the manual transmission. In 77, air conditioning was becoming standard in all cars. Buyers wanted it, but GM's packaging constraints meant you couldn't fit the AC compressor and the manual transmission bell housing in the same engine bay. It was one or the other, so if you wanted air conditioning, you had to buy the automatic, even in a sports car, even in a Corvette. The handful of buyers who chose the manual transmission were purists. They valued rowing their own gears over comfort, but they suffered. Summer driving was brutal. No AC meant cooking in that fiberglass greenhouse. These buyers would arrive at their destinations soaked in sweat, questioning their life choices. Today, the manual transmission 77 Corvettes are more valuable, rarer, more collectible, but only if they're matched with the L82 engine. A base L48 with a manual transmission is actually worth less than an L48 automatic because it's slower and less comfortable. But an L82 manual, that's the unicorn. Only 893 77 Corvettes had that combination. L82 engine with 4-speed manual. These cars represent pure 70s sports car ethos. Raw, uncomfortable, but rewarding for drivers who valued engagement over convenience. Number 6. The base price that didn't include the base. The 1977 Corvette had a base price of $8,647.65. There's just one problem. You couldn't actually buy a Corvette for that price. The base price didn't include things you absolutely needed, like floor mats, $22 extra, but required for delivery, or a spare tire, $105 extra. By the time you added the mandatory options that weren't really options, the real base price was closer to $9,000. California required additional emissions equipment, $575 extra, and dealer prep fees range from $300 to $800. The actual average transaction price was around $10,000, nearly $1,500 more than the advertised base price. Buyers would walk into dealerships with $8,600 and discover they were $2,000 short. The Federal Trade Commission investigated, but found no legal violations. Legally, Chevrolet was in the clear. Ethically, that's a different question. Number 5. The L82 engine that wasn't built by Chevrolet. The L82 was the performance option. 210 horsepower, 495 dollars extra. Except here's what Chevrolet didn't tell buyers. The L82 engines weren't assembled at the main Flint plant. They were assembled at a completely different facility in Tonawanda, New York. The Tonawanda plant was building performance engines for multiple models. High volume, tight schedules. Corners were cut. The L82 engines had a failure rate nearly triple that of L48 engines. Chevrolet knew about it, but fixing them would have required slowing production. So the engines kept shipping. Dealers handled warranty repairs. The really interesting part? Some L82 engines were actually assembled using L48 blocks. There was a shortage of L82 specific castings. So Tonawanda grabbed L48 blocks, machined them to L82 specs, and shipped them. Nobody noticed for decades because the VIN derivatives and engine codes were correct. Number 4. The owner's manual error that caused engine failures. The 1977 Corvette owner's manual contained a critical error. The recommended oil change interval was listed as 7,500 miles or 6 months. This was a huge increase from previous years. Why the change? GM was trying to reduce perceived maintenance costs. Except there was one problem. The engineers never approved the 7,500-mile interval. The manual was printed with marketing's numbers, not engineering specifications. Owners followed the manual. They changed their oil every 7,500 miles, and their engines started failing around 40,000 miles. The 70s oil formulations couldn't handle 7,500-mile intervals. Chevrolet quietly extended warranties on affected engines. Class action lawyers circled. GM settled out of court. Industry insiders estimate GM paid out $30 million in claims. Today, if you're buying a 77 Corvette, ask about the engine's history. If it has documentation showing oil changes every 7,500 miles, that engine is probably damaged. Number 3. The frame rail rust that hides in plain sight. Corvettes have fiberglass bodies. They can't rust, right? Wrong. The frame can rust. And on 77 Corvettes, there's a specific rust pattern that's destroying cars from the inside out. The front frame rails, right where they meet the body mounting points, have small drainage holes. These holes trap moisture. Salt and water accumulate. The rust starts from the inside and works outward. You can't see it. The frame looks perfect from outside. The problem was caused by a manufacturing change. In '76, GM switched to a new frame coating process. Cheaper, faster, terrible at preventing rust. Every single 77 Corvette left the factory with frames that would eventually rust in this specific pattern. The solution is expensive. Frame off restoration. Media blast the frame. Repair any perforations. Cost: $15,000 to $30,000. Insurance companies don't recognize frame rust as insurable damage. It's normal wear and tear. Several cars have literally broken in half during transport because the frame rails rusted through. Number 2. The VIN error that created ghost Corvettes. In late '77 production, the St. Louis assembly plant discovered they'd been using incorrect VIN sequences. About 400 cars had shipped with bad VINs. GM had a decision to make. They chose to issue supplemental VIN documentation, but leave the incorrect VINs on the cars. Every affected car received a letter explaining the discrepancy. These letters were supposed to travel with the car forever. Most got lost. Today, there are approximately 477 Corvettes with VIN numbers that don't decode correctly. They're completely legitimate factory cars, but their VINs say they shouldn't exist. This creates massive problems for current owners. Title transfers get rejected. Insurance companies refuse coverage. Lending institutions won't finance purchases. One owner in Texas has been battling the DMV for 7 years. His car is absolutely legitimate, but the DMV computer says the VIN is impossible, so his car remains untitled, unregistered, legally undrivable. Number 1, the secret that saved Corvette forever. Here's the ultimate truth about the 1977 Corvette. This car saved the Corvette program from extinction. The Corvette was dying. Sales were declining. Emissions regulations were killing performance. Insurance costs were soaring. Young buyers couldn't afford them. The business case for continuing production was falling apart. GM's board scheduled a meeting for January 15th, 1977. The agenda: discuss discontinuing the Corvette program. Everything was on the table. Kill it outright. Sell the name to another manufacturer. Turn it into a badge on a different platform. 3 days before that meeting, something remarkable happened. An internal analyst discovered data that changed everything. The Corvette wasn't profitable as a standalone business, but Corvette buyers were the most loyal customers GM had. 73% of Corvette buyers purchased their next car from GM. Even if it wasn't another Corvette, the retention rate for other GM sports cars? 38%. Corvette buyers were worth 3 times more than their initial purchase because they stayed with the brand. The analyst presented this data to Pete Estes, GM's president. Estes understood immediately. Corvette wasn't a profit center. It was a customer acquisition tool. Kill Corvette, and you'd lose the most valuable customers GM had. When the board met on January 15th, the conversation changed. Instead of discussing whether to kill Corvette, they discussed how to keep it alive cheaply. The answer? Keep the 77 design unchanged. Minimize investment. Focus on incremental improvements. Let the Corvette coast until the business case improved. That decision saved Corvette. Without it, there would be no C4, no C5, no C6, C7, or C8. Corvette would have died in '77, remembered as a 60s icon that couldn't survive the malaise era. And the 1977 model year represents the pivot point, the moment when Corvette stopped being evaluated as a profit center and started being recognized as brand equity. Every single Corvette built after January 15th, '77 exists because that meeting happened. So when you see a 1977 Corvette, you're not looking at a forgettable malaise-era sports car. You're looking at the car that saved Corvette, the model year that proved sports cars could survive anything if the people making decisions understood their true value.